All right, good evening and welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of April 3rd, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciak, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Carter. Mr. Young.
Present.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
I move to excuse Jeremy. He's again in the military and serving our country. So I ask that we excuse him.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Ms. Hubick to excuse Mr. Carter. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, we're on to item 3, announcements and committee reports. The good news is there's a really short one. The bad news is I have a lot of announcements to talk about and maybe call it mayor council communication. So thank you, Mr. Young, for covering last week's meeting as mayor pro tem. I was in Washington, D.C. at the National League of Cities conference. And if you didn't know, Mayor Woodards, who is the mayor of Tacoma, she is the president of that organization. And just some highlights, rail safety was a major highlight, and needless to say, I engaged with with the BNSF rep and talked about the incident we had in our community just recently, but obviously that's a major issue for a lot of cities. ARPA funds, I thought that was interesting because lots of cities have not spent their ARPA funds. The good news for me on ARPA funds, and I think for most folks, it's direct to cities from the feds without, no offense to any of our state folks, but without going through that hurdle. But it was interesting enough that a lot of cities haven't spent their funds and they're having challenges. We've spent ours, if you didn't know. Went over to the Pentagon with Mayor of Oak Harbor, to talk about the importance of our Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island, not just for national security, but also to our local economy and the many families that live in Anacortes and in Oak Harbor. Also met with our federal representative, Representative Larson, and I'd like to thank his staff for helping out with some FEMA permitting issues. So got a lot of good movement there. More to come on that. So. That was where I was, and next thing I'd like to mention is accreditation. So great job by our Anacortes Police Department as always. So on Tuesday of last week, just a great job. I'll just point out Captain Chad, Katie, Val, Jackie, and everyone else that participated in the accreditation on-site inspection, which happened Tuesday of last week. Happy to report that we received a perfectly clean accreditation review, which is a big deal. And as the chief mentioned, he's not sure if we've ever had a perfectly clean review through the previous 4 cycles. So great news there. The Preston at our Maritime Heritage Center is open for the season. Don't ask me, don't quote me on the hours because I don't know off the top of my head, but it is now open for the season. Saw a couple members of council at the Trestle formal opening last Friday, so that was great. Thanks to the Samish for hosting that. So we did an official reopening of our beloved Trestle. So that was a great event. And then I was honored to be a charter member of the Anacortes Young McCool Veterans of Foreign War Post 12220. So it was just chartered on Saturday. And that was great. And then ended up with just going to mostly read because I'm off when I go off the top of my head that can be dangerous. So I'm going to read most of answering a question of what is happening on T Avenue. And if I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that, I would have a few $100s. So the city has been working closely over the past 2 years to provide outreach and support services for residents experiencing homelessness in Anacortes. We have partnered with the Anacortes Family Center to provide social workers to respond with the Anacortes Police Department and our community paramedic to struggling residents. As we have seen, several individuals gathered along T Avenue historically in RVs, but recently in tents as well. The city has been continuously monitoring the situation and is working diligently to support alternative options for those individuals. Over the last year, many individuals have been successfully supported in finding alternative housing, and the city has been able to remove several dilapidated RVs. Unfortunately, in February and March of this year, the city has seen a marked increase in the number of RVs in the area and a number of new tents placed within the city right-of-way. Additionally, the amount of garbage and debris in the area has created an increased public health and safety risk. On March 18th, one of the RVs on T Avenue caught fire, which escalated the need for immediate response. On the 22nd of March, for the health and safety of those living on T Avenue and the surrounding law-abiding public, I directed city staff to mobilize city resources, including overtime, to execute a cleanup operation on T Avenue. I gave them no later than 31 March. Representatives of Public Works, Parks, Police, Fire responded with the goal of cleaning up all the trash in the public right-of-way. Anacortes Police Department was prepared to cite any and all individuals for interfering with cleanup or for violations of other city codes. We thoughtfully built a plan to clean up this area while following all legal requirements. The city provided clear notices on March 24th that all the trash and tents must be removed from public right-of-way or risk removal by the city in no less than 72 hours. On March 28th, our Public Works and Parks Department, supported by APD and AFD, removed nearly 6,000 pounds of remaining garbage and 4 unoccupied tents. Shelter space was confirmed available for anyone who needed it. No one took up the offer. Additionally, city staff cataloged and stored all personal property collected and will safely retain it for 60 days to allow owners to collect it. City staff were able to clean the entire area without major incidents and do so in a way that minimized risk to the public and staff. We will use this cleanup as a model for future efforts to keep our streets clean and safe. Some longer-term solutions we are continuing to work on. I know the council's working on the Title IX code changes outlawing public drug use and littering of drug paraphernalia, parking code updates, revised street sweeping, and possible addition of no camping ordinances. I want to thank our citizens and the council for your support in this very challenging environment for all concerned. But we at least owe this efforts to our 17,800 other citizens not living on the streets that also have the same rights to health and safety. So thank you for letting me get that one out. And with that, I don't have any other announcements, and we're to the Public Works Committee.
Mayor
Ms.
Wheeler?
Moulton.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee met at 5 p.m. today. It was Mr. Young, Mr. Walters, and myself, and Public Works staff. We talked about the cartograph contract for the wastewater treatment plant implementation. Basically what that is an asset management system that we use throughout the city departments. And for example, the water treatment plant and the operations division as well. This is one of the last divisions to be pulled in. It will cost about $40,000 with a $6,400 a year subscription. So that contract will be coming to council before the end of the month for approval. This is for increased consistency of software and use and asset management throughout the division and throughout the city as well. So it's a very positive step. And two of our staff members, Rob and Marley, are actually going to present at a conference to other cities in Western Washington of how to actually do this. So that's pretty cool. We talked briefly about the C-Click Fix app that we now have at the city. For example, if you see a pothole, you can go online and report it and follow through the steps until it gets fixed. And we're getting about 20 requests a week, and this will be promoted more heavily on our website and through the A-Town is Our Town magazine, which is due to arrive in your mailboxes the second week of April. So check that out. It's pretty user-friendly if you need to report something. You can do that. And there's also a video tutorial coming to show people how to do that. We discussed the boulders on 6th and H Avenue. It's that corner, that curve going up from the Guimas Ferry. And there's been some neighbor concerns about what's going to happen there. And the decision that's been come to is the boulders will be moved and a split rail fence will be continued along that so that people don't drive off the side, or it'll be safe for pedestrians, and there won't be parking there, which some people won't be happy with. We talked about some wildlife corridor signs for Oaks/12th Street, because sometimes deer get hit there because people drive too fast. And we talked about the potential of the city purchasing some, but the city has a lot of signs already and they cost quite a bit of money, but the Public Works Department has no objection to private citizens obtaining their own signs and putting them up, just not in the city right of way. So that's available to people to do. We spoke briefly about the Guimas Ferry and the proposed rate increase of about 71%. And also they're discussing turning the free parking lot into a paid parking lot. And there's a lot of disruption amongst people about that. So we just kind of talked about it. There's not really a lot we can do about it from the city standpoint, but it will affect us. So we'll find out how that goes. They're still discussing it. And that was it for tonight. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other announcements, committee reports? Okay, we'll move on to item number 4, which is public comment, and this is an opportunity for any members of the public to address the council on anything that's not on our agenda. And I've got 2 people signed up, and I'll start with Beth Bell.
Good evening. One, thank you very much for the cleanup.
And you know the rules that...
I'm Beth. I live in Old Town Anacortes.
Okay, great.
All right, last name Bell. You said it.
I know.
First, thanks for the cleanup on T. I actually met with Dustin later that day or right after he'd done the cleanup, so greatly appreciate that effort and hope that you guys continue to monitor and do what's needed. I'm actually writing you about what happened with Ordinance 4044 last week, and basically it's intention, possibly versus public perception. As a member of the audience, I was shocked and stunned, and needless to say, dismayed that the council actually took action when it did not need to. The ordinance presented by Steve Hoagland was not only unclear and written in circles, it was even questioned by both Walters and Moulton on when and how the rewrite should and could take place. When Hoagland was asked by Councilperson Moulton how many multi-use buildings do we currently have that fit the status of this ordinance, his answer was, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's inexcusable and downright irresponsible by both Hoagland and the council to take action on this ordinance, albeit the intention was probably good. So, who pays for the difference in these costs? Business owners that are renting the spaces on the first level? The taxpayers? Do you have a city slush fund? When does the city predict the use of multiple meters and/or program that can adequately measure utilities in the current mixed-use buildings and future buildings the city and state are pursuing? That's a question for you guys to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next signed up, I have Mike Pearl.
Good evening. My name is Mike Pearl. I live in Anacortes. I'm learning the rules. Mr. Mayor, City Council, audience. First, let me ask a question. Is this the day that the bonus height ordinance moratorium expires? I believe it is.
I believe it may have expired on the end of the last month. So.
Okay, that's close enough. Thank you. Today I'm making a special notation of that expiration of that moratorium on the bonus height ordinance. I'd be wearing sackcloth and ashes for the city council, except I have no sackcloth and I quit smoking 43 years ago for the ashes. I believe the expiration of the moratorium, which was put in place only due to the direct challenge of the ordinance by hundreds of citizens of Anacortes who wrote letters, put flyers in hundreds of doors, had signs made, floated helium balloons to the height of the proposed 5-story building so folks could get understanding of what was coming, had many, many open meetings to discuss the ordinance and moratorium, and equally important was the lack of good public information beforehand. I'm almost certain the minimal legal information was provided, but then I would have presumed that the appropriate property tax for any BHO building would have been required by the county and confirmed by the city. Fortunately, the tax situation has been resolved and it brought $46,000 back to the county. But with that minimal legal information, only about 25 people originally went to the public hearing at the senior center because the public hearing was only for notification for the additional parking lot that Fidalgo Flats needed to comply for its project. It was for the parking lot, not for the building. 25 people went there to listen to it. Were so surprised at the comments by the developer there, but was actually going in, that another meeting was asked for and requested. Mayor Gear put it up a couple weeks later, and then we had 75 or 80 people. Came into the city council later on and had 150 people. A lot of public concern, But there had been, part of the problem was there before that notification, which was originally the yellow sign on the street there, there'd been very, very little information. And because of this, the seemingly lack of transparency has created so much distrust by some of the public, some of the members of the city council and planning, and that still exists. And that's really unfortunate. We really need to have clarity on things. People get really, really spooked when they think something is happening on the side and they don't care for it. I would hope for greater transparency in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, one other question, if I may. Where are the shelters that the people that were living on T Avenue, where do they end up, or what's available?
Well, nobody, as I stated before, nobody took advantage of the shelters that were available.
Oh, yeah, and I just wondered where they were, that, if they're, or what's available for those folks.
Typically the First Step Center.
Pardon me?
First Step Center.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have anybody else signed up, but I think I saw somebody come in late. Oh, yeah, come on up.
Yes, I'm Evan Saxton. I live here in Anacortes. Mike just asked where the folks who were ousted ended up, and they did not end up at the First Step Center. In fact, today there was an RV that was towed. Gentleman who has lived on T Avenue for some time, friend of mine, Randy. He's currently in a recovery program. And for whatever drug use he's recovering from. And he took the services that were offered to him. And he is in the process of making a better life for himself, doing the things that our community has asked of him. Maybe not the way that our mayor specifically and our police specifically demand him to take the avenue that they see, but he's doing the right thing. And his RV was towed today. All of his belongings went with it. He's currently unavailable to retrieve those items. He's currently accruing the costs of having his vehicle towed, having his RV stored, and without currently an income in order to retrieve that. That is unconscionable. We have developed a number of ordinances, rules, and directed the ones that we already have against a very specific portion of our population. We have laser focused our tools to harm people in our community. And when they try to do the right thing, they're harmed again. And it's really, really, as a person of means, I am thankful that I'm not in those situations. I can't understand what the day-to-day is like in those situations. But then when you do overcome these circumstances, you're just knocked down again. And it's just gross. And to hear people, leaders in our community, pat themselves on the back for a job well done, and that's the result, what are we even doing? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to address the council? Okay, moving on to our consent agenda. Item 5A, B, C, and D.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
move to approve consent agenda items A through D.
Second?
All right, a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Mr. Young, and I'm going to take additional discussion on item D, because I think it's important to remind the council that on that contract, and the public as well, the Guimas View area, the fiber contract, I think we estimated that would be about a $4 million piece. We're about 2.01 million into the trenching part, and this contract is for the aerial. But what I wanted to pause on is I just really am pleased with the staff work, both the Public Works and the Fiber Department working together, where we think we're going to be able to do a lot of that work ourselves, when we initially thought it was going to be a $4 million bid. So anyway, just thought it'd be important to mention that particular contract is a result of a lot of good work and learning from what we've done before. So anyway, that's it. All right, so a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Mr. Young. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. We are on to item number 6A, which is our public hearing, ordinance 4047, amending the 2023-2028 capital facilities plan. And Mr. Lunsford is going to kick this one off.
Thank you, Mayor Miller, council members, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm here tonight to talk about the ordinance before you in your packet, ordinance 4047, the Depot Pavilion project. And to give you a little background on how we got here, paint the picture of why we need to do this, and give you some preliminary ideas of the concepts we're working on. So with that. So last year, the city was hoping to collaborate with a private partner to create a temporary events center. With the port unit down at the transit center closing, we were looking for a place that we could affordably find a place to move those events. So we were looking to partner with MJB and find a spot that we could do this with them for in the range of $40,000 to $50,000, converting an existing structure or structures to use as a temporary center. And as that progressed, the location changed slightly and the price increased tenfold to about $400,000 to $500,000. That didn't work for us. So we were starting to talk amongst ourselves about where that could happen. And so we thought of a pavilion on the Depot Plaza. And that idea was an opportunity to collaborate with the farmers market and to host events. So it would allow us to use, if we're going to spend that type of money, how could we get the biggest benefit to the community? And so the idea was to put that on the Depot Plaza in some location there to benefit the farmers market, giving them year-round access to a center outdoors for vendors to come and go with kind of roll-up doors, et cetera, that vendors could go into. And the doors could be put down and you could use it as an event center as well. So that was what we had thought about as a concept to go out and investigate support for with funders. So one of the reasons we thought of doing that and the funding that we were looking for with the county and the state and locally is knowing that the farmers market is an economic incubator, meaning that businesses start at the market and they go downtown. Several, I think 9, the market cited, have done that, gone from the market to downtown. And then they can also extend their season, which would benefit all vendors. So the market has written us a letter of support, supporting this concept as we go forward, how to benefit them for their purposes of supporting their business and the business of all the people that are vendors there. Community groups who also rely on an affordable place to hold an event, like the Transit Center, or a smaller version at the Depot, or an alcohol-free version at the Senior Center, which is great, but sometimes people enjoy a slight beverage, and so the Senior Center doesn't work for everyone. And so we're trying to find a place that we could replicate that wouldn't be exactly like the Transit Center, but would help those kinds of events, maybe a dozen a year, that want to have a fundraiser at the Transit Center. And could we move that into a place at the Depot Pavilion if we were to build one? That's the background. That's how we kind of got here. So the reason why I'm here tonight is because in applying for these funds, we need to have state, county, and local sources pitch in to help us get there. So these agencies require us to have this item in our comprehensive plan or by virtue the CFP. And since we hadn't conceived of this in its entirety last year when we brought you the CFP, we're bringing that to you now. So this is just a concept level discussion. I don't have building plans. I'm not bringing you building plans. We haven't gone through all the various processes we need to go through. This is just a concept so we can get it in the CFP so we can go out for funding, which would then create the kinds of things that many people are looking for, which is, what's this going to look like? So if you're not familiar with the Depot Plaza, this is a nice aerial view provided by our GIS department. You can kind of see the farmers market in action there with various vendors and tables and things going on the plaza itself. So this image at the bottom is not what we're going to have. This is just an example of what a post and pole building could look like. So we're looking at post and pole construction, move this a little bit, of about 6,000 square feet. That would replicate what's currently more or less at the Transit Center, about 6,000 square feet of an enclosed structure. As you can see in this concept below, you have the ability to open it up to make it an open air market, or you could have the roll down doors to close it up in the wintertime, or to have a private event. So you can see that style. We are looking at about 800,000 in grant requests. That could go up or down depending on what we find. If we went up, then we could add more amenities like heaters and various things like that that would make it a more comfortable space. Solar panels, whatever we decided that we could afford. And then, of course, we want to respect the historic nature of the depot as we do this. That's an important part of this process. So, again, we're coming to you tonight just to add it to the CFP so we can go out for the grant funding that would allow us to do the planning and the concept drawing that we need to do to make this a reality. So, with that, any questions?
Thank you. And yeah, and this is a discussion item. And Mr. Young, you will go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate the idea in the sense that, the transit shed has been such an iconic part of our town. It really exudes this hometown feel about it, and, it was part of when I moved here to Anacortes almost 14 years ago. It was just such down-home warmth, even though, spaces between the boards, but it was ours. So the tragedy is in, not being able to use that going forward. And what I appreciate about this idea as it's being flushed out is the thought that the town itself could also use it. But it's also part of what we're going to also continue to do to attract people to Anacortes. I mean, because again, the transit shed was such an integral part of hosting events, one thing or another. But we won't have that. And I think that is such a good idea for the city to be able to do that. I think that, I was talking to someone this past weekend about them wanting to bring some events from Seattle here, meaning smaller sizes of it, but where are we going to do it? And so it really does, for a city our size, bode well for us to be able to have those additional venues that we can somehow cobble together if we need to, in order to keep it hometown, but yet at the same time allow people that want to come here and experience our beautiful place a great venue to also begin to host events and, you know, increase shopping downtown and everything else. So, you know, I like the idea. I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Hoagland is also here to talk about the ordinance if anyone has those questions.
Yeah, and I think our plan wasn't to look for action tonight, but just make sure we get it out there. And I know I'm sure I've talked to everybody on council individually as we evolved through this process of, again, working with the developer to try to help plug the gap when the transit shed closes at the end of the year. So, Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lunsford. I'm curious, I think this has some kind of a tie-in to the Depot Master Plan of 2006 or whenever that was.
Correct. Thank you for that. So the Depot Master Plan of 2006, we looked at the idea of how to better provide first a pavilion out back, which was done with the bricks that came through, I think, Senator Raker's office and then other grants that came to the city. And then how to build an additional outdoor restroom, which came to us from county economic development funds, or .09 grants. And so finding a way to cover part of the plaza or provide shelter for the farmers market is a part of that concept. How exactly that will be done isn't specifically addressed, but the desire to do that, to extend their season and to provide them what they need, the elements that they need to do that are part of that idea.
Okay, so this is a new process for me. Obviously, we talk about the capital facilities plan every year in the budget, and we always have some surprises and some things that I look at and say, what? That just maybe I haven't, anyway, we always have questions about some of these larger dollar projects and where they came from and how they're going to be paid for. And to me, this is a really nice idea, and as you say, it's not fleshed out. For example, where's the kitchen? I mean, I know it's early days, but at the same time, I'm not really comfortable adding something to the capital facilities plan at the cost of $800,000 that's like a post and pole building that could very well turn out to be great, but I would really like to be farther along in the process before I say yes to it.
For us to get there, we need the money to get there. So I could draw from reserves to pay for concept drawings and planning drawings, but my preference would be to go out for grants to do that and ask for grantors to help us move through that conceptual process. I can't go to the county without this in the CFP, so I can't apply for those grants. So that's the rock and the hard place. So I think that if we can go out for it, as I said, I think this is the beginning of that public process, and what will be in it, I think, will come as we go along, as well as how would it fit in with the historic nature of the depot, because I know that's very important to the community. So I would rather ask grantors to help us fund that planning project than to pull that out of, say, Parks Reserve. That's my logic behind it, Ms. Moulton.
Yeah, and as far as the timing goes, it would have been great if we knew that it wasn't going to work out with the developer, that wasn't going to be able to fill that gap before we discuss the capital facilities plan. But just the way the timing worked out, like I think I've discussed with all of you, it would have been better to include that early on. But as we were working with the property owner to, with about a $40,000 budget, and then it became a $500,000 budget, and we just said we need to look at other options, and that kind of happened around the end of December, January timeframe.
So, Mayor Miller?
Mr. McDougall and then Ms. Cleveland.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem where if it's not in the capital facilities plan, we can't go asking for grants, and if we can't develop plans without having some money. So I'm actually pretty comfortable adding a new item to the capital facilities plan because that doesn't cost us anything to add the item. I think in the in the capital facilities sort of discussions of last fall, one of the things that we kind of talked about as a group is like there's categories of items in the CFP, and there's a category of stuff that we absolutely must do on a particular time frame, and those things get budgeted and they happen. And then there's other categories where it's kind of like it's optional, really nice to have if funding becomes available. If not, well, it doesn't happen, that kind of thing. And then there's some stuff that's in between, of course. So I look at this as kind of that second category where it would be great. And so let's see if we can find some money to make it happen. So, thanks.
Ms. Cleland.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you talking to, I think, most of us individually about this project, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you, Mr. Lunsford. A couple things that concern me. I think the idea of creating a more substantial structure for the farmers market to extend their season and protect from weather makes a lot of sense. I have a challenge seeing how we program both the farmers market and those community events when they predominantly happen on a Saturday. So one of my questions is, can we has the information from, and all the work that's been done by the port when they had all of their community projects, interviews of the different vendors, the different organizers who do the fundraisers, the caterers who do the food for these events and all of that. Can we pull that information and kind of go through that process? Because I have a challenge seeing how it fits both, it covers both. And if it may be during this process we articulate it down to actually this is just for the farmers market more than really for an event space, to me that might be what we come to the conclusion. The other thing is that I have a hard thing with just the CFP is $800,000 for an event space of this size. That's not very much money. So how are we handling, does that include heat or not? How does the acoustics work if we're in theory going to do events with it there? I think there's, and I agree with Mr. McDougall, I think that's the chicken and the egg and we've got to do some work on it, but there's some pretty major things that I'm not sure if I can wrap my head around it yet. But that doesn't mean I'm against putting it, continuing to work, and I would agree going for some grants makes a lot of sense to do that research. I just hope that we take advantage of the research that's already been done by kind of partners with the city.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, I primarily have a concern with the integration with the depot. I don't see how that building, if you would advance to that slide 5, I don't see how that building fits that space and is architecturally appropriate for the space and for integration with the depot. And since I've heard about this, been trying to imagine what type of design might fit that space, and I haven't come up with anything. I appreciate the chicken and the egg question, but I'm not personally ready to endorse the project via addition to the CFP without having that question resolved, because I don't want to endorse a project that we would regret because of its incompatibility with the historic nature of the depot. Now, if it is for public events, those events are ones that routinely apply to us for lodging tax money, and assumedly we could spend lodging tax money rather than parks reserves, because there's a long list of other things that parks needs to spend its reserves on that could maybe get us there, maybe help us figure out some kind of rendering like this that would be architecturally appropriate for the space. I also share Christine Cleland-Grath's concern about programming and how we do Saturday farmers markets until 2 p.m. plus takedown, and then Saturday events that same night. I haven't resolved how that would actually work because people are setting up for those events.
So that's a great question. So we do that all the time. So people use the depot on Saturdays all the time, and we don't let them in until 2-ish on Saturday, because parking is a nightmare, right? Just getting say you want to have a anniversary party or wedding, what have you, there's just not ability to load your stuff in while the market is there doing their thing. And so we just try to work with those parties as best we can, knowing that parking and access is limited. So your concerns are completely valid. We have handled them for years and have some ways to deal with them. I think we're very much open to suggestions, looking at the research, finding what would work the best. And I think that as the mayor's pointed out to us, and I neglected to tell you, this isn't the only event center we're hoping that will be in town. We're hoping it's a kind of a stopgap event center, and one that could be used in the future for smaller things, but we hope that with development other places that the port's looking at, that other private entities are looking at, they're going to make what you want in a local event center that's more part of a hotel or a boutique hotel or something that would have the accoutrements you're looking for. This will be kind of a more, a farmer's market that can hold events.
So there are lots of considerations there. I've thought about this idea of the MJB project and its proposed hotel and its proposed event center associated with that hotel. And sometimes that may work, sometimes not. If you look at something like the Cotton Tree in Mount Vernon, it's an event center associated with a hotel and not really what I think we're trying to achieve. If you look at the Woodmark in Kirkland, maybe that is what we're trying to achieve, but it's also a private event center. It is, I think, a public event center owned by a public entity is more like what this community wants. And I think what this community deserves is one that is associated with its maritime heritage, its coastline, on the water. And I think that's what everybody likes about the transit shed, beyond the fact that you can nail stuff to the walls in there. So I think there's potentially a lot of discussion we could be having about how to achieve that. I think we should be grateful that the port has made available the transit shed in the last many years, but it's not really their role. It is more the city's role. And so I think it's the city's problem to figure out. But there's lots of possibilities here. I'm just not really ready to endorse that particular one, because I do think it will anger a substantial portion of the community that would be very concerned about the architectural compatibility.
That is kind of a cartoon drawing of what could be. So it's not, if you want to see some architectural drawings that are more realistic of what could hold the space, that's not it. That's just a cartoon drawing kind of what could a post-and-pole building could look like.
Well,
not necessarily the one that it will look like.
That's what has been presented to us.
And this is the free version,
Right.
Mr. Walters.
Right.
We're going to work on the real version. Sorry.
So that's what I would be looking for before endorsing modification of the Depot Plaza. And, capital facilities plan items come with expenses and revenues. And the proposal doesn't have any revenues, funding sources to fund the $800,000 expense. So we ought to have that in the document that amends the capital facilities plan.
Okay.
But we also ought to have an estimate of operating maintenance and replacement costs for this. What is it really we're talking about, and how much will it cost to operate, and what are the long-term fiscal impacts?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Just to follow up, all extraordinarily good questions, points that require the due diligence that all of council speaking to. I think that the challenge that we really face right now is that in order to get to those answers, to get to the place where we can figure out if this works, if it's something, how it will work, how it will be run, how architecturally it'll fit in, we have to begin by seeing what resources we can get and how we can get there. This discussion, it won't be done in the shadows. This would be one that would be done publicly and up front. This is something, in my opinion, that will truly benefit our whole community here, whether it's the farmers market or whether it's music out on the bay, whatever it is. That whole central area there, as the port continues their North Basin development, as MJB and its property continues to move forward in its development, my worry is that without us as a city itself and having something to keep our draw closer downtown to, then, as MJB moves forward with this wonderful development, unless we're somehow tethered together, I think that I see the central part of their nucleus sort of is endemic to their community that they're building. And sure, people will, filter out and do other stuff. But this allows us in a reasonable fashion, rather inexpensively, to not only suffice a need of a community, but also allows us to be able to push forward. What it looks like, we can make that determination. How it can work only comes after the investigation of, possibilities. But the one thing we're going to need is that if there's an opportunity for resources for us to explore this and do the due diligence we will do, it has to be in this plan. And I don't know how we can do it, any other way. I think Mr. Dugal, expressed it wonderfully in that we have tiers within our plan. We can choose to decide that we want to eliminate it if it's not working, right? If it doesn't meet the criteria and the work and the thoughts of what it should be, could be, if it even works for the community. But in order to get there, we have to have it in to begin that process. Then we can also have any of the other discussions about whether it works, if it's something we want to do, if it's not, what it looks like, how it will function, how will we do. All of those are kind of questions where it is the cart before the horse. Those are real questions that we need to answer, absolutely. But given the timelines that we have and what we're working on, this is just an exploratory possibility of something that may end up being something wonderful for our city. So, I'm hoping that we can allow this, whether or not we put conditions that we want to have answers to. It's important. But it allows us to see what we can find. We may find out that there's great amounts of money out there to help us do the very thing that we say we want in our community.
Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you. So I've been rolling around in my head for a long time, and I haven't been able to articulate my hesitancy when it comes to this space. And I think that my challenge is that you bring up the point that the depot plan is the master plan's from 2006, right? That strategic plan. I think Anacortes looked a lot different in 2006 than it does today. That's almost, 16, 17 years ago. When we look at how the waterfront is changing and we look at how kind of our open spaces are changing, and we realize that that dog park that we're used to seeing as kind of this grassy field that's open won't probably be there much longer because the port has a plan for it, as they should. I guess I have a concern that this is kind of this one area of open space where people can gather, where when it's not necessarily having events there, kids can ride their bikes there, people can, be with their dogs there. It flows well into the Madrona Grove. I guess I have a concern that by putting a building there, it ruins this really kind of special space that's available for everyone in our community that we may not want to lose going forward. So maybe I'd be more comfortable if we could finesse this CFP to include how we use, let's articulate how we want to be able to use that plaza. And from that, then move forward what kind of more permanent structure enhances the plaza versus just kind of encloses it.
Yeah, thanks. Again, all great inputs, great questions, and in my perfect world, the port or the MJB property would build a hotel with a convention center and fill the need that the community needs a convention center, and specifically one that has specific set-asides for a lot of the nonprofits that have used the transit shed over the years. But certainly the earliest, we're talking 2025 for, best dream case would be 2025. The port transit shed is closing at the end of this year. So that was kind of the timeliness of the nature. But again, all great questions, great discussion, and we'll continue discussing. All right. Great, thank you. All right, next up is item 7, other business, item 7A. This is community action of Skagit County, and it's a quarterly update. This is a report, and Ms. Shu is going to introduce.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the audience. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Sandy Finney, who's Division Director for Community Action of Skagit County. She'll be giving us a quarterly update, so this will be something that we can begin looking forward to on a quarterly basis. And I also wanted to just mention that Executive Director Bill Hinkle is here as well. So thanks to them both for being here, and we look forward to the presentation.
Mayor Miller, council members, thanks for having me here. Again, I'm Sandy Finney. I'm Division Director at Community Action of Skagit County. Pardon the mask. I will do my best to speak clearly. If you don't understand me, I'm happy to repeat. Okay, thank you. Again, for the benefit of those who may not have heard the background of our opening an office in Anacortes, I wanted just to review the fact that we're very proud to partner with the City of Anacortes and the Anacortes Housing Authority to be able to expand services in Anacortes. The purpose is to be able to provide more comprehensive wraparound services for customers that we're already serving in Anacortes, as well as to provide better access and information to individuals and families who are eligible but maybe haven't yet benefited from our resources and services. And lastly, of course, we plan to work more closely with local service providers to ensure that we can fill in gaps in service as well, which we know exist. So progress, challenges, and solutions, of which there are many. Office space has been secured in the Anacortes Housing Authority building at 216 Commercial Avenue, but we can't move the infrastructure in until, and people in until the current tenant has moved to its new location. Our hoped for date would be in late May, but that is still to be determined. A care specialist lead was hired to start March 1st as planned, but unfortunately she had to go on medical leave and she is expected to return around June 5th. We did start an Anacortes email that has been live and staffed since March 1st, so there is somebody on the end of that if somebody has resource needs and needs some service. We do have an interim plan executed, or we're about to execute. The Anacortes Family Center has very graciously provided temporary space for Community Action to have 2 staff members there. For our soft opening, the office hours will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Those office hours won't necessarily begin tomorrow, but tomorrow is when we hope to go over there, begin to set some of the infrastructure up for that temporary location. We'll also have signage starting on Wednesday or Thursday to be able to show where community action is that can be placed on commercial. And we are continuing to plan for a rotating schedule of other programs and services, including WIC, supportive employment, senior and disabled services, and energy assistance. Those are things that, as we mentioned in the original plan, would be starting later in the summer. As far as next steps, I should add, our next steps would be to find out why there's been such a delay on the Anacortes Housing Authority space, so we can understand that and assess whether that's a space that we'll be able to move into. And then, of course, to begin to look at other options for space as well, if for some reason that one isn't going to work out. I did want to give a report on the data that we've collected for the past month. This is actually probably about 2.5 months worth of data, so not the full first quarter. We served 196 unduplicated Anacortes residents. That does not include 165 unduplicated WIC clients. There is undoubtedly an overlap in those clients, but not a full overlap. 41% of the clients were disabled, 8% were Latino or Hispanic, and again, as you can see, for WIC clients, that's generally a higher percentage. About 25% were seniors, and 42% self-reported as unhoused, which, to clarify, that's not using the HUD definition of homelessness. That is a self-reported definition of homelessness, or being unhoused. You can see the federal poverty levels here as well. That's in line with what we've seen in the past, with a very high percentage of people being in the lowest levels, sort of 0 to 50 and 51 to 100% of the federal poverty line. And then there's a race breakdown as well. As far as the 10% unknown, that's fairly typical. We're able to collect racial information and ethnic information usually on about 90% of our population. And as far as services, in the first quarter, this was what I was able to pull. I wanted to highlight the new services that are now available in Anacortes. 12 received our new care coordination services. This is a service delivery model that is focused on making sure that anybody who has housing challenges is connected with wraparound case management support. So they're not just looking at making sure their housing needs are met, but what they need as far as medical, or physical and mental health is being addressed, employment supports, family, child care, and things like that. 23 were served by our street outreach program, as you're familiar with, and they cooperate very closely with the Anacortes Family Center outreach program to do joint work with those who are unhoused in Anacortes. 4 were served by the new Recovery Navigator program, which went live in December. 165 received nutrition education with WIC. 79 received energy assistance. 27 received assistance from our Mount Vernon Resource Center. And 15 received senior disabled volunteer services. And 46 individuals were enrolled in the housing interest pool through coordinated entry. And last 3 years were served by the Veterans Assistance Fund. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those if I'm able to. I did want to mention, because data is something that there's always questions about, and I know everybody has questions about accountability and transparency, and I just wanted to reiterate our commitment to making sure that we have data accuracy, integrity, and transparency. We use a client services database that's called Empower. We have a data and assessment manager who carries out training, reviews data quality, and she leads quarterly data analyses in our leadership team to make sure that all our supervisors are reviewing their data and that it's accurate and reflecting what they understand to be true about their data. Staff collect demographics from all our customers, and it's collected either by paper or electronically. And this is a change that our outreach and care specialists now have devices that they can carry with them. So they're able to enter data in the field when they're with a participant. One of the things that's really useful is that we can report on unduplicated households or individuals by program, service, or location, which I think gives us some really good information to work with. So for example, when it comes to energy assistance or housing assistance, we usually try to report by household. When it comes to other services, it's usually by individual. So it just depends on what you're looking for. I wanted just to reiterate, if you have any questions about any of our data collection methods or reports, please do ask. I'm happy to walk you through that. And we also recognize that data collection can put it's a lot of time for staff. They also know it's very important, but we're also doing our best to make sure that we're not overburdening them with data collection so that they can do their job of making sure to build relationships, build trust, and really the focus is to make sure that the participants we're working with are getting towards their outcomes. Outcomes being, how has their life changed for the better? So we're not tracking just services, we're trying to see what movement has been made for those participants, and we've got a real eye to make sure that that's happening. Here's a couple notable outcomes for our fiscal year 2022. I'm not going to go through these, I just wanted to make sure that you saw that there are significant numbers of people making some really important outcomes because of our services. How to help. You can always help us get the word out about what we're doing. Again, this email address is live and has somebody behind it that can help. And later this week, we will have somebody in person at an Anacortes Family Center location to be able to help connect people with resources. Please invite someone from Community Action to talk at a service club or event so we can provide more information. As far as volunteers, we're always recruiting. We need volunteers to be drivers or to do yard work or in-home care, especially for seniors or those with disabilities. So, and I've had conversations, for example, with Island Health that I know needs some drivers to help transport some senior and disabled people after appointments they've had at Island Health. So that's an example of an opportunity that we could use. I'm happy to answer any questions, and if I can't answer it, Bill's here as well to help. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mayor Miller. You know, I really appreciate the presentations that and the detail that you go to. Data quality is always important. You know how that is. And I really appreciate that about the work that Community Action does. I will acknowledge that I was on the board of Community Action for a period of time when I first moved here to Anacortes, and I've always been a fan because I really always saw what I believe was hard work with little money, doing some extraordinary things across the county. But what I'm really appreciative of is that given your move to have an office here, it will allow the community to also see some of the greater works that you're doing, not only across the valley, but doing directly right here in Anacortes, which is a lot. And so I really appreciate that. I would welcome, you know, whether it's a quarterly update or whatever it is, but you know, these things like this showing us how much of an impact you're making into the lives of the very people that need us most is so important. You know, even though sometimes, you know, we believe that we have agencies that are working. We've got the Family Center, which is an extraordinary organization as well. We've got, you know, Habitat. We've got so many others, the Housing Authority. And they're all working incredibly hard to give service to people, but the need is great. It is just outpacing what sometimes we have the resources to do. So, you know, I'm saying all this to say how having this additional information about work that you're doing here in the area, how it complements other agencies that are here. And that I just want to thank you guys for this presentation. Of course, I was at the event this past week for Community Action. It was an extraordinary event, and just thank you for continued work and also a great presentation here to Council.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Any other comments, questions?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
The event Mr. Young mentions was your fundraiser event this last week, and a couple of us on council attended. And I do think everybody in the audience was struck by the stories that were told via video and through representation in person there of the people that had been helped by Community Action, including veterans, and notably in your presentation, including seniors. And we've got plenty of seniors in Anacortes, and we've got plenty of seniors in Anacortes who need help, who are homebound or who have disabilities or age-related disabilities. There isn't anybody out there from the government coming to help those people. It is Community Action, nonprofits, sometimes our firefighters on their own time, who are helping out people that are in need like that. So it's really important to me that we have this agency here in Anacortes. You look on their materials, for instance, at the fundraiser, it says Mount Vernon, it says Concrete, and you've had an office in Concrete for many years, and Anacortes knew. We've certainly had the need here for a long time. So I really appreciate your willingness to accept our support and open an office in Anacortes. I'm hopeful we get the office space figured out pretty soon, because the small amount of money that we did provide you was contingent on having some free office space. But that senior connection is important, and also all the new work that you are now doing with the street outreach team and those kinds of things has potential to fill gaps, you know, that exist in the other services that we are offering. So I'm encouraged by your presentation tonight and look forward to what we can do in the remainder of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. And I would also, it makes me think that what I'd love to include in future presentations too are stories of some of the people behind the numbers as well, and bringing in, for example, Mariana Brandt, who's heading up our Senior and Disabled Services program, and have her come and share a story or share some of her experiences, or Steve Simmons, who heads up our outreach program, to talk about some of his experience. And of course, Dulce Vasquez Cruz, who's our resource center manager, who, when I said, all right, what is it you'd want the Anacortes, presence to look like? She's like, I want to model it off of that East County Resource Center. Like, it'd be great to have that type of presence here. So there's a lot of excitement to be able to get moving, readiness to do it, and hopefully we'll be able to bring in more of those stories.
And we talk to Steve on a regular basis, Steve Simmons, who you mentioned, on a regular basis as part of our Housing, Affordability and Community Services Council Committee. And I do think it would be very valuable to have him present at maybe your second quarter update and provide the insight that he can provide into what people on the street that he's interacting with, because he's street outreach, are going through, how they got there, how they can escape. That would be particularly insightful, I think, for the rest of council and for our home television audience.
Thank you. Ms. Cleland.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for this presentation and actually the actual numbers and the data, because I appreciate the fact that you called out the importance of accurate data and the willingness to do a deep dive when we have questions. We're lucky enough that we see you on a regular basis at our HACS meetings, so a lot of these kind of bullet points, we know more in depth of what those mean. But I know that the care coordination services model has changed in the last while, or it's launched now. Can you just give us a little bit more understanding? Because we hear a lot about how people are signed up, but then they're dropped off a list and they're really frustrated. So how is this new program going to try to address that?
Sure. The best way to do that is to first describe what the old model was. And the old model was that somebody would come in the door and say, I have a housing problem. We'd say, great, we'll do an intake via coordinated entry. But because there's so little housing, they're put on a list, and then that's it. And they're expected to check in once a month. And if they don't check in, then they're automatically dropped off the list. That was how it used to work, and there was no support in between. The change in this service delivery model is to say there's hundreds of people sitting on this wait list not getting served in some way. So let's flip it on its head and say, all right, somebody comes in with a housing challenge or they're unhoused, and we say, all right, we're going to do the intake, we're going to get you on the list, and we're immediately going to hook you up with a care specialist that will be able to sit with you and say, all right, what are some of your other needs? What are some barriers that we can identify and start working on in the meantime before we find an opening for you? And in that meantime, we're going to make sure that you're on Medicaid, and we're going to make sure that you've got a primary care provider, and we're going to make sure that you're signed up for benefits that you might be eligible for that you haven't yet accessed, essentially. So the idea is to walk along with somebody and make sure to kind of hit on those needs. If somebody needs employment, for example, and they want to work and they're willing to work, let's get them hooked up with some supportive employment, even before, and what they need to do that, even before that, official housing grant comes through to be able to pay for their rent. That's the idea, is to say, we're not just going to put you on a wait list and you have to wait, but to work with them along the way. And instead of having to wait for them every month to call in, the idea is that you're in contact with them, let's say every week, to make sure that you're there. And so that way, our care specialists are more constantly in contact, and our street outreach team too is in contact with those people to say, oh my gosh, something came up, they became eligible for this housing support, now we can get in contact with them because we know where they are. This is an experience that our sister agency, Coastal Community Action down in Aberdeen, noticed that when they implemented this care coordination system, that they were much better able to stay in contact with people because they weren't disappearing or their phone wasn't working or something. They were able to stay in contact. So that's a very sorry, a longer than I meant to version of the difference.
No, but thank you. I think that's a really key thing that will benefit us having you actually in our community so that that kind of regular check-in can happen for folks.
Yes.
So I mean, I think that's a really good component because, yeah, getting that golden ticket isn't necessarily that easy to get with the challenging of housing. So let's make sure we're also providing other services in the meantime.
Exactly, and I would also mention that that's because the reason that we put a care specialist lead here is because we wanted that care specialist here, but she's a lead precisely because we expect her eventually to be overseeing other care specialists so that we can even have more outreach in the community. I think that's an important point to make. And also the reason that we're also working on affordable housing development as well, because we know that needs to be done. Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Oh, Ms. Moulton.
Oh, thanks. I just want to chime in and thank you for that description of care coordination. That's really helpful for all of us, I think. And I just want to underscore the partnerships that you have with the Family Center, with their offering a place for you to land for a while, and also with the Housing Authority, and again, to work to complement each other and not be duplicating efforts. And I think the communication, as far as I can tell, amongst the three organizations is very strong and very positive, and I applaud that because it's so helpful to the members of our community that are in need. So thanks for that. I look forward to hearing more, and also I really look forward to the stories because those are the most powerful, the most real part of what you're doing. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Walters?
Yeah, tagging on to that, it certainly is not the case that community action is duplicating services. Community action is filling gaps. And our Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee met last week with Helping Hands, which is another organization that is attempting to fill gaps in Anacortes. So you got the Family Center, you got the Housing Authority, you got Community Action, you've got Helping Hands. There are others. Salvation Army is one. There are others. It did drive home the need for city coordination of these efforts and an attempt to harmonize what everybody is doing to make sure that we, all of whom have different access to different money, are coordinating in the most efficient means possible to reach and have an impact on as many people as possible. And it reminds me of the fact that we suggested this January last year in our HACS report, that one of the missing links in Anacortes, the unused or unmet needs, is that coordination piece. And so there is more for us to do here to try to get to that, to try to figure out how we can make the best use of it. This is one important step. There's certainly much more to do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Coordination, yes. All right, thank you, appreciate it. And before we move on to our next item, which is item 6B, I think I probably failed to open the public hearing on item 6A. Is that Mr. Lunsford?
We were having such a lively discussion, I forgot to ask you to do that, Mayor.
Yeah,
So
okay, so the public hearing is open, and again, if you have comments about that item 4047, the capital facilities plan, please email Mr. Lunsford, myself, council, and we'll make sure to get those comments on the record.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, on to item 6B, which is our contract award, Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, Office 365 renewal. This is an action item. Ms. Hsu.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and members of the audience. Tonight, what is before you is the renewal with the Microsoft Enterprises for our Office 365 account. I do not have an actual presentation to go through. This is a standard item that we look at each year. We are purchasing this through a cooperative agreement through the Omnia contract, and I appreciate that Ms. Swetnam shared that. Honestly, lots of our tech agreements, the legal terms and conditions are very difficult for us to kind of get comfortable with, but this one, because it is specific for government agencies, was an easy thing for us to look at. Each year when we are looking at the renewal, we start with an audit of our Microsoft needs. And we're looking, just to ensure that we're matching the number of devices with the different services that are necessary. With the agreement, we not only get the applications with Microsoft, but we also get the Windows operating system that goes with it. And we get the assurance that if there's any kind of software updates or changes that happen during that time, that we're automatically enrolled to be able to have access to that. So the model of software really has changed over the last couple of years. It used to be that you buy a package, you have this disk, you own that. And now we're very much in more of a rental arrangement from a software perspective. And so I think of this really as our annual software rental agreement with Microsoft. I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have, but a couple things that we've found with this particular year that will be a benefit to us is that right now we are purchasing phone numbers for Teams meetings, for department heads, for the mayor, so everybody can have access to an 800 phone number that they can call in if they're not able to get online. That becomes just a standard feature and offering with this version of Microsoft. The other thing is that there are some increased security precautions just in terms of multi-factor authentication, and then also some additional conditional access rules that will be in place. So that's just an overview of the Microsoft agreement.
I think it was clear, but what you were saying was those phone numbers no longer we will have to pay for separately.
Correct, yes, and it will be applied to everyone that has the full operating system that will have access to that. So we'll have some cost savings even with the annual increases that come forward with the contract.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I think this is pretty straightforward. I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm surprised that the agreement term isn't longer. It's only 1 year. Do you have any comment on that? Was a 3-year term not available, or does this make sense for some other reason?
What we do is, I think that we look at a total of a 3-year contract, but we break it into 1-year agreements. And so from a budgeting standpoint, this is what we had allocated for this year. And so oftentimes when we're working with the contracts, that we know that we're looking for a longer term contract, but it doesn't necessarily change the pricing for us.
So this particular contract is 1 year though, right? Because that's what the
Yes.
cover sheet says. All right, so you're suggesting that a 3-year contract wouldn't improve the pricing?
That's our understanding.
Yeah, my
because it's
suggestion would be that it might lock in the pricing though, since it seems to be going up. One of the reasons we moved to Microsoft 365 is to move away from on-premises software, Exchange server notably, so that we don't have to manage our own Exchange server. We're a small organization still. It's not something that really makes sense for us to have the expertise in-house to do. Do we still have any on-premises services like that haven't yet been migrated to the cloud?
We're in the final stages of transitioning away from on-premise Exchange, and the IT department is fully on top of that, and we are going to having everything in the cloud.
Okay. The other big reason for that, obviously, is security, and not having to manage it ourselves with our limited expertise means hopefully we can rely on Microsoft's expertise for security. I'm hoping that we could have a revisit of our security audit sometime soon to see where we are with improving our practices since that time. Multi-factor authentication obviously is something everybody's gone to. I'd like to see the city get there as well. I think this lays all the groundwork. We have all the pieces here, so I'm just hoping that can happen near term.
And good feedback. That is something that we're working on. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that's happening with that. The other thing that I would mention is that through our partnership with Washington City's Insurance Authority, they are splitting the cost, doing a beta program with us with Critical Insights this year, where we will update our critical incidents operations plan specific to our IT division, and also have on-site critical incident training that's going on. So really appreciate that support from Washington City's Insurance Authority and Critical Insights.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
I just had a quick question. We use Microsoft Teams for like committee meetings, video conferencing, all sorts of internal, I guess, collaboration. And just not being as familiar with Office 365, is the Microsoft Teams collaboration tool part of this licensing agreement, or is that actually a separate license?
That's included with this agreement.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? And this is a contract action item. Which requires council approval.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
I move to approve the contract as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Ms. Hubick to approve the contract award Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, Office 365 renewal as presented. Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the work. No further business before the council. I will adjourn the meeting. Good night.